In this video, I want to show how we can define our own class in Python so that objects of that class can have whatever attributes or methods we want. So here's just a basic, silly example. I'm going to say class named color, and then parentheses, and then let's say RGB. Let me do the name of it first. Let's say the name is blue, and let's say RGB is going to be 00255. And then I can instantiate one of these named color objects by calling named color, open close parentheses. And then if I check x.name, that has this blue blue value. And if I do x.rgb, I see this list here. So that's fine, but I mean, of course, it's why did I call it silly? I called it silly because there's no variation to this. So these named colors are always going to be blue. So that's not what I want. Instead, I want to be able to pass some arguments when I create the object, and I want those arguments to set the name and to set the RGB value. So let me update this a little bit. And so secretly, whenever I call this, what is happening is some method of the object is being called that is the underscore underscore init underscore underscore method. And these show up all the time in this Python-based object-oriented programming. They're called dunder methods, D-U-N-D-E-R, for double underscore. And let me show you an example of one of these. I'm going to say def underscore underscore init underscore underscore. And then before you pass whatever arguments you want to include, you always have to start it with self. And this self, it refers, for example, like to this x here, whatever the object is that you're trying to create. And that self is pretty confusing at first. Eventually, you just sort of get used to including it, and then eventually later, hopefully it starts to make sense. But for now, just think of it as something that you have to include as the initial argument when you write methods in one of these class definitions. So then I'll say name, and then I'll call it something other than RGB, just so you can see the difference. I'll call it RGB tuple. And then instead of name equals blue, we're going to say self.name equals blue. Okay, so that's going to like say x.name should have the value of blue. But of course, I don't want it to be blue. I want it to be whatever the input argument was. Okay, and similarly, self.rgb, okay, I want that to be whatever the input argument is. So in this case, it'll be RGB tuple. Okay, and if I try to do x equals named color again, so what it's doing here is it's secretly calling the init method with self, and then I didn't give it any arguments, so it's going to say two arguments are missing. Okay, these two positional arguments, name and RGB tuple, are missing. So how can I fix that? I could say, for example, red. So the reason it's called positional is it's emphasizing that I do not need to write name equals. Yeah, I can just put in the argument without naming it. It would be called a keyword argument if I did have to specify name equals. Okay, and then RGB tuple, that will be, hey, I know this isn't a tuple, but 25500. Okay, and now if I check x.rgb, I get this 25500. Okay, perfect. So next, what I want to do is I want to allow us not to input an RGB tuple. And so one way to do that is to give a default argument. And a good default argument to give is none. And so let me show you how we're going to get around this. I'm going to say from matplotlib.colors import toRGB. And the nice thing about this toRGB function that I've just imported from matplotlib is I can give it something like red as its argument, and it gives me the RGB tuple for it. Only difference is it's normalized a little differently. It's normalized from 0 to 1 rather than integers from 0 to 255. So one way I could fix that, for example, is I could say, let me just show an example of how this would work. Let me just leave this blank for a second. I'm using list comprehension for X in 2RGB red. Okay, so if I just have this X here, then I get the exact same list that was output before, or the list version of the exact same tuple that was output before. And so what I want to do is I want to change these from floats between 0 and 1 to ints between 0 and 255. So one way to do that is I can multiply by 255 and then round it. So round x times 255. Okay, and I like the fact that it's not showing the decimal points here, so that's a good sign that this really is integers instead of floats. And so what should I do here? I'm going to say if, and it can be very dangerous to have something like RGB tuple equals none. In Python, this happens to work in this particular context, but it's much safer to say is none. And so with if it's none, then I want to decide what the RGB tuple should be. And so let's set it like this. We'll set RGB tuple equals this. Okay, and instead of 2RGB red, we'll do 2RGB name. So for example, if name were red, then we'd have exactly what we were trying up above. So what is this doing? It's saying if no argument was provided for the RGB tuple, then we're going to try to use this 2RGB function that matplotlib gives us, and we're going to use that to set the RGB tuple. So let's try it. Let's try named color orange. And let's save this with the name, variable name z. And then if I check z.name, I should see orange. And if I check z.rgb, okay, so that's like this self.rgb, I should see, I guess it'll be a list, the list version of whatever the RGB values for orange are. So let's see. Okay, excellent. So this seems to be working. Maybe I'll show just one more thing. If I look at Z, then I get this kind of strange thing here. And secretly, when you write Z like this, what happens is it gets it calls another one of these dunder methods called REPR for representation. If you do print Z, it calls a slightly different one. And this is __str, like string, __. So let me just add the string part, okay, so that we can print one of these objects. So I'll say def __str__. So this dunder method is only going to take self as its argument. And then we want to say what string should be returned. And let's use an F string, and let's say color, and then we're using F strings, so I can say self.name. And this only makes sense, this self.name, it only makes sense because self is getting passed to the function here. So the color self.name with RGB value. And then let's convert it to a tuple, and then self.rgb. And then let's see if that worked. So I need to reinstantiate this element again. And if I just do z by itself, I'm going to see the same thing as before, because I didn't change the REPR dunder method, but if I try print Z, I should see this. So the color orange with RGB value 255, 165, 0. Okay, so that was a quick introduction to making this named color, and we'll do more with this named color class in the next video.